Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell. Also, don't forget to drop a comment saying what you're doing right now or where you're watching from. In the early hours of May 3rd, 2025, the crack of a shot pierced the pre-dawn quiet of a college neighborhood in Columbia, South Carolina. By sunrise, 22-year-old Logan Federico, an aspiring teacher visiting friends for the weekend, lay dead, and a horrifying crime spree was unfolding around her. What began as a fun Friday night gathering had turned into a nightmare by dawn. Logan had traveled to Columbia to spend the weekend with friends near the University of South Carolina campus. After a fun night out, they returned to a rented house on Cypress Street just before 3 that early Saturday morning. Not long after, as the friends settled in to sleep, an intruder quietly slipped into the neighboring house and rummaged for valuables. Police say the man entered the room where Logan slept and fatally shot her in the chest during the break-in. It all happened in the darkness, without warning. A young life taken in an instant. Logan's friends didn't immediately realize the horror that had unfolded. It wasn't until later that morning that someone discovered Logan unresponsive, and a 911 call alerted authorities to her body. Investigators quickly determined that Logan was an unintended victim and that she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. As detectives processed the scene on Cypress Street, they soon realized Logan's slaying was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger crime spree. And the more you hear about this sick puppy who committed these acts, the more you're going to wonder what sort of system let this guy out to begin with. The suspected shooter was identified as Alex Dickey, a 30-year-old man with an extensive criminal history. In fact, Dickey was already wanted on numerous warrants at the time of the attack. On that same morning, he had already broken into the house next door, stealing keys, credit cards, and even a firearm, before targeting the home where Logan slept. Authorities believe the attack on Logan was completely random, a byproduct of Dickey's desperate string of burglaries. After shooting Logan, Dickey fled the scene immediately. He stole a car using the keys taken from the first burglary and sped off into the dawn. With stolen credit and debit cards in hand, he drove to nearby West Columbia and embarked on an ill-advised, fraudulent shopping spree. And seriously, this is one of those moments where we just have to be thankful that most criminals are so stupid. This pointless act of post-killing consumerism would thankfully stop him from inflicting further serious harm. He bought numerous items with his victims' stolen credit cards and left an ample trail of transactions for police to follow. Dickey was also apparently unfamiliar with this new technology called a surveillance camera, which depicted him making these purchases. Dickey's crime spree didn't stop there. Later that day, he drove the stolen car out of town into rural Saluda County, South Carolina. As he attempted additional illicit purchases, the stolen vehicle broke down and left him stranded on the roadside. Undeterred, Dickey brazenly called a towing company to haul the broken car to a friend's residence in the small town of Gaston. Honestly, at this point, I'm surprised he didn't just have it towed to his own house. And yeah, this would be a comedy if it wasn't so damn tragic. By then, Columbia police had traced the suspect's path through his spending spree and the stolen car report. They coordinated with the Lexington County Sheriff's Office and state agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to zero in on the Gaston location. When officers arrived on Sunday, May 4th, Dickey fled into nearby woods to evade capture, turning the manhunt into a tense overnight search. Through Saturday night and into Sunday, authorities scoured the area for the armed fugitive. Despite severe weather conditions hampering the search, law enforcement remained in pursuit. The break came around 4 p.m. on Sunday, May 4th, when a resident in Lexington County spotted a suspicious man emerging from the woods. At the same time, there was a report of yet another stolen vehicle in the area, but he crashed the vehicle shortly after. In a bizarre attempt to avoid arrest, Dickey forced his way into that home in Gaston where his friend was staying. The cops tracked him down and he refused to surrender peacefully, so officers from multiple agencies surrounded the house. A tense standoff ensued as they ordered the intruder to come out. In a final reckless act, Dickey set the house on fire while barricading himself inside. Police weren't about to let the suspect escape again. They moved in as flames began to spread, eventually pulling Dickey out through a window to safety before taking him into custody. Remarkably, no one else was harmed in the fire. Dickey was immediately transported to a hospital for treatment of minor injuries and smoke inhalation, then released straight into police custody. Just about 36 hours after Logan's life was taken, this sick predator was behind bars. With Dickey in custody, investigators began unraveling the full extent of his crime spree. It was also revealed that Dickey was a career criminal who had been charged with nearly 50 prior crimes over the past decade. He had multiple felony convictions and had spent time in prison, yet he was free that weekend to wreak havoc. This revelation only deepened the tragedy, raising questions about how someone with such a record was walking the streets. In the days following the slaying, Logan's family and the Columbia community grappled with grief and anger. At a press conference on May 5th, Logan's father, Stephen Federico, stood alongside police officials, clutching a photo of his daughter and fighting back tears as he spoke. He described Logan as a vibrant, caring young woman who worked 2 jobs while attending college, with the dream of becoming an elementary school teacher. Authorities wasted no time charging Alex Dickey in connection with the crime spree and Logan's slaying. Columbia police obtained warrants accusing him of the attack, multiple counts of burglary, several weapons charges, grand larceny, and fraud. Additional charges for arson and other offenses were filed in neighboring Lexington County, reflecting the blaze and break-ins there. A judge swiftly denied Dickey bond, ensuring he would remain jailed as he awaited trial. Given the shocking nature of the crime, South Carolina's Attorney General even suggested the case might warrant federal attention and urged prosecutors to consider the death penalty. At present, this is where we stand, and Logan's case has become a rallying cry against a system that has failed to protect innocent people from repeat violent offenders. There's no way around the hard truth in this case. Logan Federico should still be alive. Her death wasn't the result of some unforeseeable lightning strike, but the predictable outcome of a system that repeatedly released a violently unstable offender back into the public. Alex Dickey didn't suddenly snap that weekend. His record showed years of escalating violence, disregard for the law, and an inability to function safely in society. When someone racks up nearly 50 prior charges, including serious felonies, the question isn't how this happened. It's why it was allowed to happen. Every prior release was a gamble made with other people's lives, and Logan paid the price for that systematic indifference. In my view, justice for Logan can't stop at conviction alone. It has to include accountability for the failures that put her in danger to begin with. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. Also, just a quick reminder that I do have 2 other channels to check out as well, one dealing with unsolved mysteries and the other with historical subjects. For nearly 44 years, the mystery of who killed 16-year-old Pamela Moorer haunted a quiet Illinois suburb. The teenager's 1976 slaying remained unsolved until a breakthrough in forensic technology finally unmasked the perpetrator in a way that no one could have imagined in the 70s. This revelation not only closed a painful chapter for Pamela's loved ones, but also exposed a suspected serial predator who had lurked in plain sight. On a cold January night in 1976, Pamela Moorer left a friend's house in Woodridge, Illinois, to buy a meal at a nearby McDonald's. When she didn't return home as expected, her mother reported her missing by late that night. The next morning, a road crew found Pamela's body abandoned beside a road in Lisle. The high school sophomore had been strangled and subject to an indecent assault, her life tragically snuffed out by a brutal attacker. The community was stunned by the violence inflicted on this shy, studious teenager. Police launched an intensive investigation, interviewing friends and classmates in hopes of identifying a suspect. At the time, the police chief vowed they would find Pamela's killer, but that promise would take decades to fulfill. Despite the investigators' efforts, no arrests were made, and the case eventually went cold. Months turned into years with no answers, leaving Pamela's family to endure decades of uncertainty and grief. But her case wasn't alone. It became one of several puzzling, unsolved slayings of young women in the county during that era. For decades, the question of who killed Pamela Moorer lingered. Investigators refused to forget the case, periodically revisiting the evidence as forensic science advanced. Crucially, authorities had preserved biological evidence from Pamela's body, collected long before DNA profiling existed. In 2001, forensic analysts finally extracted a DNA profile of the unknown suspect from the preserved evidence. However, when this profile was run through the national database, it yielded no matches. In hindsight, the reason was simple. The killer had never been convicted of a crime and was already dead by then. With no hit on the genetic material and no other strong leads, Pamela's case remained unsolved well into the new century. Her family could only hold on to the hope that someday new technology or information would bring answers. The breakthrough in Pamela's case finally came in 2019 with cutting-edge DNA analysis and genetic genealogy. DuPage County investigators worked with a private lab to apply advanced testing to the old evidence. Genetic genealogy works by comparing crime scene DNA to profiles that relatives voluntarily share on public databases. This in turn allows distant family matches to point toward an unknown suspect who can then be confirmed with a direct test. It's not a perfect system by any means, and issues like adoption or the perpetrator not being from a select few countries like America or Canada can be major hindrances. Thankfully, this wasn't the case here, and the team built a family tree of possible relatives and narrowed their search to a single name: Bruce Lindell. Identifying Lindell on paper was only the first step. Investigators needed concrete proof. In late 2019, Lindell's body was exhumed under a court order, and his DNA was tested directly against the crime scene sample. The results provided the long-awaited definitive confirmation. It was also the first time in Illinois that this genetic forensic technique had been used to solve a cold case. After 44 years, science had finally put a name to the man who had cruelly brought an end to the life of this promising teenager. Detectives even traveled to Texas to inform Pamela's father and brother of the perpetrator's identity directly. Once unmasked, Bruce Lindell emerged as a frightening figure with a history of violence. At age 23, Lindell lived in the vicinity of Pamela's hometown and hadn't been on the police's radar in 1976. Starting in the mid-1970s, Lindell had several run-ins with law enforcement, from minor offenses to serious charges, but he often avoided significant consequences. This helped him stay under the radar as his crimes escalated. In the years that followed Pamela's death, Lindell's violence continued until a gruesome twist ended his life. He was arrested in 1980 for the kidnapping of a woman named Deborah Colliander, but she disappeared 2 weeks before the trial. She was later found slain, presumably at Lindell's hands. Investigators later learned Lindell had even tried to hire someone to kill Colliander to prevent her from testifying. In April 1981, Lindell's crimes caught up with him in a truly bizarre way. While stabbing 18-year-old Charles Huber to death, Lindell accidentally slashed his own femoral artery and bled out at the scene next to his victim. His death meant he would never face justice in a courtroom, but the truth of his deeds would eventually come to light. After Lindell died, police discovered numerous photographs of young women in his home, including one teenage girl who had gone missing in 1979. These findings raised suspicions that he had other victims beyond Pamela. Today, authorities believe Lindell was a serial predator responsible for far more crimes than were known during his life. Investigators suspect he may have killed as many as a dozen people and committed numerous indecent assaults across the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s. The full extent of his violence may never be definitively known, but solving Pamela's case has shed light on Lindell's deadly pattern. It was just past midnight on a quiet summer night in Tennessee when the calm of Cedar Creek Marina would be broken in the most disturbing and tragic way. This waterfront getaway on Old Hickory Lake near Nashville would suddenly become the scene of a violent crime. A young man who had simply pulled up with his boat became the unwitting target of a fleeing robber's gunfire. The senseless killing of 27-year-old Bailey Gardner in June 2024 shocked the Mount Juliet community and set off a determined investigation to bring his killer to justice. Late on the night of June 29, 2024, Cedar Creek Marina's popular restaurant had just closed when armed intruders struck. The suspects, a trio of armed robbers, waited until the staff were locking up, then ambushed the employees inside. They assaulted two staff members, who were treated by medics and released, and forced them to open the restaurant's safe before grabbing the cash and making a break for it. Outside, 27-year-old Bailey Gardner, a visitor from Kansas, was sitting in his vehicle with his boat on a trailer, unaware of the danger unfolding around him. As the robbers fled, they crossed paths with Gardner and opened fire, shooting him multiple times before vanishing into the night. Officers arrived within minutes to find Gardner slumped and unresponsive in his car, suffering from several gunshot wounds. They attempted life-saving measures as paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. Bailey Gardner perished from his injuries at the scene. The authorities were on extremely high alert, as it was instantly clear that Bailey hadn't tried to intervene in any way. He was simply cut down because he was a potential witness to the crime, despite all evidence pointing to him likely having no idea that a robbery was even in progress. The Mount Juliet community was stunned by the violence at a place known for leisurely weekends by the lake. Regular patrons expressed disbelief that such a crime could occur at their marina. In the immediate aftermath, law enforcement from the Wilson County Sheriff's Office and Mount Juliet Police Department flooded the scene to secure evidence. The robbers had turned an attack which would have only generated a modest amount of heat from the cops into a national story. Local authorities even enlisted help from state and federal agencies as needed, determined not to let the killers slip away. Again, I can't stress this enough. Had these robbers not decided to shoot a completely innocent man, they may have been able to get away with the crime. With substantial resources assigned, the cops were able to get surveillance evidence from a number of businesses. The footage reportedly showed one of the culprits, later identified as 40-year-old Adrian McLean, during the commission of the crime. Just over 2 weeks after the slaying, the breakthrough came. On July 17, 2024, authorities announced they had a suspect in custody, bringing an end to weeks of uncertainty and fear. The man arrested was 40-year-old Adrian McLean, who quickly became the prime focus of the investigation. McLean, originally from Jamaica, had been in the United States on a temporary visa that expired. A joint task force tracked McLean to a house in Nashville and took him into custody during a pre-dawn raid that same day. He was promptly charged for Bailey Gardner's death, along with 3 counts of aggravated robbery stemming from the holdup at the Marina restaurant. The arrest was a major relief for law enforcement and the anxious community, ending an intense manhunt that involved multiple jurisdictions. Authorities revealed that McLean had orchestrated the robbery with at least 2 accomplices, which confirmed the statements given by the witnesses that night. Despite this, only McLean went on trial, and the other 2 criminals remained at large. For Gardner's family, the trial in September 2025 was a long-awaited step toward justice, finally coming more than a year after the tragedy took place. A jury heard how McLean and his associates had planned the heist, and how Bailey Gardner was gunned down simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. After a multi-day trial, on September 18, 2025, the jury returned a guilty verdict for the slaying. McLean, by then 41 years old, was also convicted on all charges in connection with the Cedar Creek Marina robbery. He hasn't yet been sentenced, with that event scheduled for early 2026, but the conviction carries a mandatory life term. Even with McLean now headed to prison for life, the case isn't completely closed. Investigators believe that the 2 additional suspects who helped carry out the Marina robbery are still at large, and efforts to identify and capture them remain underway. Authorities have posted a $15,000 reward for information leading to those accomplices' arrests and prosecution. With Adrian McLean now convicted and facing a mandatory life sentence, authorities still have leverage points that could be used to pressure him into identifying his accomplices. And I'm going to discuss those before I get into a theory I have about what happened to them. One of the strongest tools is sentencing negotiation. While a life term is expected, prosecutors can offer to formally recognize substantial cooperation at sentencing. This could potentially influence future parole eligibility, which, given the fact that McLean is only 41, this must be weighing on his mind. They could also give him incentives to testify against his co-conspirators if they're captured as a result of his cooperation. Personally, I also question whether the authorities have done a full digital forensic search on everything related to the convict. I find it highly unlikely that in this day and age he had no digital communications whatsoever with his co-conspirators at any point before or after the attack. Honestly, though, I think he may have eliminated his co-conspirators after the death of Bailey. That's just a hunch, though. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in downtown Cleveland on March 24, 2013, 53-year-old Eliza Sherman walked toward her divorce attorney's office, expecting a routine meeting. Instead, she was ambushed and brutally stabbed just steps from the entrance in broad daylight. A grainy surveillance camera clip offered the only glimpse of the perpetrator, a blurred, masked figure dressed in dark clothing sprinting away from the scene. The motive behind this case, if the prosecution's allegations are correct, will go down as one of the most unusual motives in American criminal justice history. Detectives quickly honed in on Eliza's personal life for possible motives. The victim had been in the midst of a messy divorce with her estranged husband, Sanford Sherman, at the time of her death. This bitter legal battle had dragged on for years, and friends later recounted that Eliza was afraid and just wanted it over with. Naturally, Sanford came under scrutiny, but when police attempted to interview him, he refused to cooperate, hiring an attorney who shielded him from questioning. Investigators could never formally label him a suspect, and with no direct evidence tying him to the attack, that lead hit a dead end. Years later, Sanford would pass away in Florida, never having answered detectives' questions. The cloud of suspicion remained, but if he knew more about Eliza's death, he took those secrets to his grave. Under normal conditions, the authorities may have spent way more in the way of resources investigating Sanford, but this case was anything but normal. Another early focus of the investigation was Eliza's own divorce attorney, Gregory Moore, the very man she was on her way to meet. Almost immediately, something about Moore's behavior didn't sit right with Eliza's friends or the police. Eliza's best friend later revealed that on the day of the attack, Moore had oddly kept changing the meeting time and location for their appointment. This constant rescheduling raised questions about whether Eliza had been deliberately lured into a trap, and this is where things get really weird. Moore told investigators that he hadn't been at his downtown office at the time of the attack, but was somewhere else entirely. They found this to be unusual given that this is where he was supposed to meet his client at that exact time. Deepening suspicions, forensic analysis of cell phone records and building entry logs would later catch him in a web of deceit. Moore had sent text messages to Eliza just moments before and after the attack, claiming he was waiting inside his office, contrary to what he told the cops. Yet investigators discovered he was not actually in the building at that time based on the building entry logs. This contradiction was alarming. Eliza's own attorney had attempted to fabricate some sort of alibi, while also telling an obvious verifiable lie to the authorities. At the crime scene, other strange clues, or lack thereof, emerged. Besides the blurry video footage, physical evidence was scant. The attacker had been quick and efficient, leaving behind no weapon, and initially, no identifiable DNA or fingerprints. But investigators did notice anomalies that suggested a premeditated effort, likely involving multiple people. Critical surveillance footage from the building, about 20 minutes worth, had mysteriously been deleted immediately after the attack. Similarly, voicemails from the building's calling system, which Eliza might have used to reach Moore upon arrival, were found to have been erased. Taken together, it was very clear these weren't random glitches. They looked like deliberate acts of evidence tampering, and it appeared that someone with access had tried to blind the investigation from the very start. This was a devastating setback for detectives. In those first critical weeks, leads were scarce, and even some of the most crucial evidence had literally been wiped away by unknown accomplices. As the months turned into years, Eliza Sherman's case languished without an arrest. Investigators faced repeated dead ends and frustrating missteps that stalled progress. Gregory Moore, who remained a person of interest, continued to practice law for a time, giving an unfortunate double meaning to the term criminal attorney. In 2016, more than 3 years after the event, a grand jury finally indicted Moore, but not for the slaying itself, but for charges related to obstructing the investigation. He had lied to police about his whereabouts and role on the day of the attack, and investigators had uncovered even more unsettling behavior. Moore had a history of making bogus bomb threats to delay court proceedings. In fact, back in 2012, he had phoned in bomb scares to courthouse buildings as a tactic to postpone trials. This revelation painted a picture of a man seemingly terrified of facing courtroom showdowns and willing to commit crimes to avoid them. And hang tight, because this is what we call foreshadowing. By 2017, Moore pleaded guilty to charges of falsification for his lies to detectives and inducing panic for the bomb threats. He served a mere 6 months in jail, but this family attorney was thankfully quickly divorced from his license to practice law. However, with no further charges filed at the time, Moore walked free after his short jail stint, and the specter of Eliza's unsolved case continued to haunt investigators and her family. Behind the scenes, Cleveland detectives kept the file open, but were running out of angles. By 2021, with the 10-year mark approaching and the case still unsolved, the Cleveland police took a pivotal step. They handed the case over to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. The idea was to get fresh eyes and cutting-edge forensic technology involved. BCI's cold case unit, under the State Attorney General's office, had resources and analytical tools beyond the scope of the local department. This unit approached the case methodically, re-examining every piece of evidence and applying new technological techniques in DNA and digital forensics. Crucially, they were determined to find something that had been missed in the earlier investigation, and bit by bit, the cold case began to warm up. What local investigators had long suspected, the BCI team set out to prove. Cell phone technology, in particular, provided the long-awaited breakthrough. Every time a phone pings a cell tower or connects to Wi-Fi, it leaves a trace. Investigators discovered that on the day of the attack, Gregory Moore's phone behavior was anything but normal. For a critical 3-hour window around the time of Eliza's death, Moore's cell phone went dark. He had deliberately disconnected it from the network. This was a calculated move to avoid creating any cell tower location records, placing him near the crime scene. To seasoned detectives, that kind of silence spoke volumes. It was as if an invisible alarm bell rang. An ordinary person has no reason to power off their phone for the duration of an event such as this, unless they're trying to hide something. It made even less sense for Moore since he was a practicing lawyer at the time, and going dark while working made no sense, even if it was on a Sunday. The BCI team pieced together that right after the time of the stabbing, Moore powered his phone back on. While the initial investigators knew he made efforts to reach her right after, they didn't know that his phone had been off until a few moments after the completion of the deed. Notably, in the days following the slaying, Moore went so far as to obtain a new phone altogether, presumably to distance himself from any records on the old device. Such actions demonstrated an unusual level of planning and consciousness of guilt. Digital evidence wasn't the only puzzle piece that BCI re-examined. They revisited surveillance systems and building access logs with fresh scrutiny. Moore's keycard swipe into his office building was logged later that same evening after Eliza had been slain. This suggested he returned to the scene not long after the crime, possibly to retrieve evidence or verify that evidence had been destroyed by those who helped him out. With all that said, I led off by telling you the motive would be unusual, so let's get to it. Prosecutors now allege that Moore's motive was straightforward and disturbing. He wanted to delay or derail the divorce trial that was set to begin that week. This was a trial he was unprepared for or afraid to face, and as noted, he previously called in bomb threats to avoid trials. This educated professional allegedly concluded that slaying his own client was the solution to his problems. As mentioned, Moore had a documented history of drastic delay tactics, and in Eliza's case, investigators say he went to the most extreme act possible. The plan, according to the prosecutor's allegations, was originally to kidnap Eliza Sherman as a delay tactic to prevent her from appearing in court. Along the way, something went horribly wrong. Prosecutors believe that Moore changed his plans for reasons which are yet unknown. After 12 long years of uncertainty, the hard work of the cold case investigators finally paid off. In early May 2025, a Cuyahoga County grand jury reviewed the mountain of new evidence and returned a secret indictment charging Gregory Moore. Armed with this indictment, law enforcement moved swiftly. On May 24, 2025, the disgraced lawyer was extradited back to Ohio in handcuffs, ready to face the consequences of his alleged deeds. When the news of Moore's arrest broke, it sent shockwaves through Cleveland. At a court hearing in late May 2025, Moore, now 51 years old, pleaded not guilty to all charges. A judge ordered him held on a $2 million bond and demanded a DNA sample, while also forbidding any contact with the Sherman family. For now, Moore awaits trial and remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.